government of Zambia to use the opportunity granted by the High Court to find each other to ensure a dignified burial of the late president in accordance with the honors befitting a state president.
South Africa's Democratic Alliance Party Federal Executive Council Chairperson Helen Zille has convened an urgent meeting of the party's FedEx following the sacking of Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition Andrew Whitfield. While the official reason for Whitfield's firing has not been disclosed by the presidency, it is understood that this could be linked to the party's deployee taking an unauthorized overseas trip. The FedEx will meet later today to deliberate on the status and composition of the Government of National Unity in light of the recent development. The outcome will be made public after the meeting. South Africa's International Relations and Cooperations Minister Ronald Lamola says the Afrikaner group that went to the US to meet with the government officials have a right to engage anyone as they are representing their own constituency. He has called on those who have grievances against the South African government to raise them in their country. The group went to the US to complain about the country's crime levels and how the government is handling the issue. Lamola explains.
South Africans also have to know that even when you are international, you have got a duty and a responsibility to promote South Africa's national interest. Whether even if you are an opposition party, you are any group of whatever nature. Because this country's constitution has given everyone, including minorities, a platform to air their grievances, to raise their issues here in the country, to raise whatever issue that they may have. So there is enough space in South Africa, and that's why the president is also convening a national dialogue.
Lastly, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says America gained nothing from its attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. His comments come 2 days after a ceasefire ended a 12-day war between Iran and Israel. Israeli strikes on Iran killed at least 627 civilians. This is according to Tehran's health ministry. Iran's attacks on Israel have reportedly killed 28 people, an unconfirmed figure due to Israel's ban on the release of information relating to the 12-day war. The BBC's Will Vennon reports.
In a video message shown on state TV, Ayatollah Khamenei congratulated the people of Iran on what he called victory over the Zionist regime. He praised the Iranian armed forces for breaching Israel's defenses, saying the country was brought to its knees. The supreme leader also confirmed that US forces had attacked his country's nuclear facilities on Sunday, but claimed they failed to achieve their objective and accused President Trump of exaggerating what had been done. The Ayatollah offered more congratulations for Iran's retaliatory attack on a US base in Qatar 3 days ago, which he called a significant event.
Recapping on your top stories, 29 children who were taking their school exam in the Central African Republic have been killed in a crash. This is after a nearby explosion caused panic. Channel Africa News, I am Onele Ntsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Coming up in your sports news, Asawa's reaction continues to pour in after news that French club Lyon have been promoted to League 2 because of the poor state of their finances. While Senegal goalkeeper Edouard Mendy says the criticism that he has received from other players that they chased money by moving to Saudi Arabia is wide off the mark. Details of these and other stories coming up at 4:30.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa, the African Perspective, where we meet to look at the latest in business news and sport. I am Thabiso Lehoko. We are broadcasting live from Auckland Park in Johannesburg, South Africa. We are on the DSTV Audio Bouquet channel 802, on Open View on channel 628, and you can live stream us on www.channelafrica.co.za, as well as on the SABC Plus app, available on the Google and Apple Play Stores. Join in the conversation by finding us on X at Channel Africa #1, Facebook at Channel Africa, on Instagram at Channel Africa 1. You can also subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. You can send us your stories, newsroom at channelafrica.co.za, or alternatively, you can call us on +2711 714 4459. You can also send your comments and voice notes to +276 3406 9126. I'd often want to repeat that number. It's +276 3406 9126. In your comments, please tell us in which country you are in. If you have missed any of our interviews, you can find them on www.channelafrica.co.za. Click on programming. Look for Africa in Business, and you can find a podcast of whatever you missed. Good afternoon.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
South Africa is positioning itself as a key trade and investment partner for China, as the South Africa-China Shenzhen General Chamber of Commerce hosted its annual gala in Johannesburg. The event brought together government officials, business leaders, and Chinese investors to explore new opportunities for economic collaboration. Our reporter, Lebogang Mabanye, attended the gathering and filed this report.
In a room filled with diplomatic warmth and business optimism, the South Africa-China Annual Gala served as a platform to reflect on shared progress and future potential. Speaking on behalf of the Presidency of South Africa, Khadija Brown, Special Economic Advisor to the Deputy President, highlighted the growing influence of BRICS trade alliances.
The trade between the members reached $209.7 billion in 2024, marking an 11.3% year-on-year increase, which is quite significant given the current trajectory of what we're looking at, an outlook of 1.7%, given our geopolitical challenges that we are going to experience over the next 6 to 12 months.
Brown said South Africa's role on the global stage, especially within the G20 and China-led infrastructure initiatives, remain a powerful tool for championing African development.
We represent Africa to the world, and Africa has got enormous potential. Africa is bigger than Europe, China, and America put together. In terms of area size, Africa area size is 30.37 million kilometers squared. Africa has 60% of arable land, 90% of raw material reserve, 40% of the global gold reserve, 33% of the diamond reserve, 80% of coltan's global reserve, that's the mineral used for every telephone that you have in your room over here.
The same sentiment was echoed at a more local level. Gregory Ntadisi, Executive Mayor of the Mangaung Metro in the Free State Province, invited Chinese investors to turn attention towards overlooked cities like his.
I come from a city and a province whose resources was usurped by apartheid and sent to grow bigger cities that you see in South Africa. But I come from a metro imbued with enormous road infrastructure, rail, and freight. I can reach any destination of the country anytime, any soon, given the road infrastructure, given the rail, and given the air. I remain a metro, the poorest of them all, but a virgin and a land of those that command the resources to invest.
For the private sector, the challenge is not attracting interest, but securing investor confidence. Priv Reddy, CEO of Africa Utility Solutions, presented a digitized investment model aimed at overcoming delays in repayments and risk.
Capital, operational investment into projects, contracts, and more are increasingly not being repaid timelessly throughout South Africa. That is what is causing a reduced investment exposure. That's the biggest problem facing us. as a country, we are not repaying investors timelessly. But that can be the past if we look at the way technology can assist us in recovering and securing investors. South Africa and African countries are not issuing state guarantees, or they've reduced the issuing of state guarantees because of the number of projects that have already got state guarantees in progress.
As South Africa navigates its future trade direction, the gala reinforced a message of renewed engagement with a focus on trust, infrastructure and long-term partnerships. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Africa. It's time to plug into the heartbeat of the continent. Tune in to Channel Africa, your go-to radio station that broadcasts in 5 different languages.
L'Afrique du Sud célèbre la journée nationale du
Kabla hujaitwa kwa jina la Double K or more of our forests have been destroyed.
Partido Africano da Independência da Guiné.
See, Channel Africa represents every corner of this amazing land. From Lagos to Cape Town, Nairobi to Dakar, we've got you covered with the freshest news, music, and cultures. So, turn up the volume, feel the rhythm. Enjoy the conversation. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Kwa nini wanamuziki wengi sana wa kizazi kipya hawafiki mbali pale wanapofanya muziki?
Ni kwa sababu kitu cha kwanza ambacho naweza nikaongelea nikagusia zaidi sana ni kusema kuwa wale wasanii wanapotoa ngoma yao ya kwanza ikiwa kama kahiti kidogo tu, wanaanza kutamba mitaani, wanaonekana kama wapo majuu zaidi sana.
Kuna wanamuziki wengine ambao wanakimbilia kwa waganga wa jadi. Hivi muziki na dawa vinaendana?
Kitu cha kwanza naweza nikasema ni kuwa muziki na dawa haviendani. Lakini muziki ni kipaji.
Kuna watu wengine wanashutumu wasanii wengine kwamba wanaroga.
Wanaroga, wale wasanii kama wanaroga ni kutokujiamini tu. Lakini kitu cha muhimu sana ni kipaji.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Zochitika ndimo dapiri. Kamlondola wazochitika pena paliponse.
Aphungu a nyumba ya malamulo mu dziko la Malawi akuchita zokambirana zawo pa zinthu zosiyana-siyana pambuyo pa nyumbayi kutsegulidwa masiku apitawo, ndipo kondani Nyamasa ukali nafe pompano chiyambireni aphungu akukambirana masiku apitawo ndi zovuta ziti zomwe zachitika mu nyumba imeneyi ya malamulo.
Ndingathe kunena kuti State of National Address imene a President Dr. Lazarus Chakwera akhala kuipereka mnyumba ya malamulo imeneyi idautsa mpungwepungwe kwambiri nyumbayi, chifukwa pofika panopa mene ndikuyankhula pano ndiye kuti munafuna kubuka ndewu mnyumbayi. Leader of the house olemekezeka Richard Kimwendo Banda kuyimirira kuyankha koma mopsa mtima zimene amayankhula phungu oyimira ku Blantyre City South East Pasama Suleiman kunena kuti sona imene adapereka president pa 14 February ikuonetsa kuti palibe chilichonse cha zero chimene chidaperekedwa mu sona imeneyi, akuti imene ayichotse.
Zochitika ndimo dapiri. Lolemba mpaka lachisanu pa nthawi ya 7 koloko kufikira 8 koloko madzulo pa Channel Africa. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Good afternoon. This is indeed Africa in Business. My name is Thabiso Lehoko on Channel Africa, standing in for Thami Ngubeni. Join in the conversation as we steer the ship. On X, it's at Channel Africa numerical 1, Facebook at Channel Africa. On Instagram, you can find us at Channel Africa numerical 1. You can also subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. You can send us your stories to newsroom at channelafrica.co.za, or alternatively, you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. You can also send us your comments and voice notes. Remember that number, +27 63 406 9126, +27 63 406 9126 in your comments. So please tell us in which country you are in. If you've missed any of our interviews, you can find them on www.channelafrica.co.za. Click on programming, look for African Business, and you can find a podcast of whatever you have missed.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Now it's that time of the week when we cross over to our sister station, SAFM. And yes, indeed, you know, the G20 is hot on the heels. As you know, South Africa is holding the G20 presidency this year and will later host the main G20 summit later this year in November. Of course, we are joined on the line by SAFM's Ashraf Gada. Good afternoon, Ashraf. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been very well indeed. Good to bump into you 2 weeks ago, as you're well aware of, because I don't see you running, I see you walking, which is completely different. But perhaps that's what G20 is all about. Can we move from walking to running as a country, as a continent, as a world, isn't it?
Yes, and conquer, and make sure that we get through the marathon.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about this. As we know, in fact, right now there's the G20 Sherpas meeting currently taking place in the Northwest region, and all of this in South Africa, part of the build-up to the G20 summit proper. Now, South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, confirmed that this is significant, that the United States extended an apology for its non-attendance. This, of course, understands for the Sherpas meeting, right?
He stressed, however, that the G20 deliberations would proceed as planned.
Yeah, and with that in mind, let's move on to some of the significant connections, because while this is happening, as we're well aware of, Israel and Iran agreed to that significant ceasefire. So there are questions emerging around, Africa's economic position in the light of clearly the shifting political landscape, and meaning just how things shift so quickly. So there's more on that, right?
So for more, I guess, Ashraf, we are now joined on the line by the ministry's spokesperson, Crispin Piri.
Crispin, good to connect with you here on this collaboration, SAFM and Channel Africa, all around G20.
It's a brilliant collaboration, Ashraf, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of this type of collaboration. Channel Africa is quite an important platform for us to also discuss geopolitical issues on the African continent, and we often participate there. And as you were speaking, I heard you reference the conflict in Israel and Iran. One of the things that the minister touched on in his speech was the conflict in Sudan, highlighting that it is a blight on our consciousness, that this conflict is actually not, the spotlight is not shone on this conflict. And the humanitarian crisis we are seeing in Sudan is at a level that is unprecedented. We have 30 million people affected from a migration point of view alone. So it's really, really a severe crisis that the minister highlighted in his G20 speech today, G20 Sherpa speech, to say this is a platform where we should also look at how we can ensure that this conflict does not go on unabated without the world even batting an eyelid towards.
Well, I'm glad that he did highlight that. We'd certainly try and do so here on this show, The National Pulse on SAFM. But the big question, you don't have to answer right now. Yes, if it's a blight on the continent and the world, then why? So why can't that position be changed? But don't answer that now. That's another whole conversation, Crispin. Let's get on to another issue which is so important to South Africa because of our relationship with the USA right now. So there's ambiguity regarding whether the Americans will be present at the G20 proper, but for now, meeting the G20, the Americans are not there. Why?
The Americans have been participating in other G20 meetings. This one is a bit of an exception at various levels, but the other Sherpa meetings were attended at the appropriate level by the Sherpa. But as we understand it, we received an apology for this particular meeting. And we accept that indeed they couldn't make it for this meeting, but they have been participating. So it's really one of those things. And I think, as the minister has said, the agenda continues. Our presidency continues, and the G20 member state countries are here and very well represented. And we continue to champion what we believe the G20 nations should be focused on and should be addressing in a world where multilateralism is under severe decline. The UN is really seeing an unprecedented crisis of international law really being put on the back burner. and this has got geo-economic consequences as well. So that's what our G20 presidency and what the minister was raising today is a matter that we should really be looking into to ensure that as 20 of the world's most influential countries, we ensure that we really have a handle on these very important issues so that we can see more progress in the world instead of stagnation and almost a regression, if you like, even in how we relate as world's countries.
Thabiso, yeah.
Well, let me come in there, Crispin, and ask you, South Africa's vision. What does it envision for the continent in influence in global decision-making through platforms like the G20, especially as the world undergoes such significant geopolitical shifts with many emerging powers on the poles?
Yeah, I think, Thabiso, I can give you an example through one of the things that the minister spoke about today is the critical minerals focus, which the whole world is currently fixated on, because we know that electronic vehicles are partnered or are driven literally by minerals that come from the very northwest that we are sitting in right now. Catalytic converters in cars come from platinum that's literally found in the northwest as we speak now, but not just the northwest, other African countries as well. So Africa as a whole is a repository for critical minerals. And how do we ensure that these minerals do not leave the countries, our African countries, without any value add, unbeneficiated, if you like? We need to ensure that when they leave this country, they leave at a point where value has been added, and we don't have a situation where we are now importing the end product of our very own minerals. And that's a very critical focus of our G20 presidency, and one of the things that we are championing uncritically as a goal for this G20 presidency, to show that all of these influential countries that trade with us on critical minerals also commit to ensure that there will be value at source in the countries that these minerals are obtained from. And there's broad consensus on that I can definitely say is emerging from the G20 countries around that.
Well, Crispin, interesting you use the word value add, I think 3 times. It's very important because it gets me thinking about what is the value of South Africa as a country effectively being the president or the presidency of the G20, and then, its ability, therefore, in terms of this value add, to influence key decisions within the G20 and outside it?
That's a good question. I mean, South Africa is already playing a critical role in various multilateral fora. Even on this critical minerals discussion, we had members on the UN panel who determined how we should approach critical minerals from a UN perspective. So it's a very critical platform for us as a G20 country as well, because we then are able to reassert some of the very important values that we believe the international system should be shaped around. International, a rules-based system based on international law, a centering of multilateralism with the UN at its pinnacle. These are very important principles that seem to be waning at a very, very critical time in the world. And that's what South Africa's presidency is contributing. And I think it's of immense value that we really refocus on these values and focus on ensuring that the Sustainable Development Goals, as broadly identified as something that we should all be focusing on, are ultimately implemented so that we can see Africa itself developing, but so that the global south can shed the iniquities of the past.
Well, maybe we need to work out a way to measure that value add you talk about. But Thabiso, to you?
Well, I think I've taken more than enough from what Crispin has answered, and it seems as if partnerships are at the core, at the center, and we're yet to see how these deliberations and decisions will be implemented.
Okay, let's leave it at that. Crispin Phiri, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Crispin is the spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And there we are. We'll do it again next week. Every day around, every Thursday around this time from 4:15 to the bottom of the hour, we will connect with a key decision maker, a key player within the G20 in the build-up to the G20 summit. This wonderful collaboration, and I'm quoting Crispin Phiri on this one here, between SAFM Radio and Channel Africa.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Kwa nini wanamuziki wengi sana wa kizazi kipya hawafiki mbali pale wanapofanya muziki?
Ni kwa sababu kitu cha kwanza ambacho naweza nikaongelea nikagusia zaidi sana ni kusema kuwa wale wasanii wanapotoa ngoma yao ya kwanza ikiwa kama kahiti kidogo tu, wanaanza kutamba mitaani, wanaonekana kama wapo majuu zaidi sana.
Kuna wanamuziki wengine ambao wanakimbilia kwa waganga wa jadi. Hivi muziki na dawa vinaendana?
Kitu cha kwanza naweza nikasema ni kuwa muziki na dawa haviendani. Lakini muziki ni kipaji.
Kuna watu wengine wanashutumu wasanii wengine kwamba wanaroga.
Wanaroga, wale wasanii kama wanaroga ni kutokujiamini tu. Lakini kitu cha muhimu sana ni kipaji.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Ahoy, matey.
Captain here to help, right, boys?
Set sail with us on a digital voyage like no other. Channel Africa has a treasure trove of awesomeness. That is our website and social media pages.
Tell me, why are you here?
We want you to be part of our adventure.
The winds are changing, Captain. And this time...
Imagine a world where curiosity knows no bounds, where entertainment meets enlightenment, and where every click leads to the African perspective. Visit us on our website, www.channelafrica.co.za, or follow us on Instagram or on X at Channel Africa 1. Go on, like us on Facebook at Channel Africa 1. So, spread the word. Tell a friend that Channel Africa's online variety is what they need on the web. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
We are broadcasting live from Auckland Park in Johannesburg, South Africa. We are on DSTV OWK, channel 802 on OpenView, on Channel Africa 628, and you can live stream us on www.channelafrica.co.za, as well as on the SABC Plus app, available on the Google and Apple Play stores. Join in the conversation by finding us on X at Channel Africa, numerical 1, on Facebook at Channel Africa, Instagram at Channel Africa 1. You can also subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. You can send us your stories to newsroom at channelafrica.co.za. Or alternatively, you can call us on +2711 714 4459. You can also send your comments and voice notes to +276 406 9126. In your comments, please tell us in which country you are in. If you've missed any of our interviews, you can find them on www.channelafrica.co.za. Click on programming, look for African Business, and you can find a podcast of whatever you have missed.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
We now cross to Buntle Headbush, who's standing by with our economic indicators.
Business news on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Good afternoon. In our final look at the indicators this afternoon, $1 is trading at 17 Rand 75 in South Africa. In Botswana, it's trading at 13 Pula 27. In Namibia, 17 Namibian dollars 75. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 23 kwacha 39. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 56. In Ethiopia at 136 birr 17, Uganda 3,573 shilling, and in Tanzania it's at 2,652 shilling. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,548 naira. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 49 Egyptian pound 91. In Tunisia, it's at 2 dinar 90. Algeria, 129 dinar 11. In Morocco, the dollar will cost you 9 dirham 3. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 911 kwanza, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,853 to the US dollar. Looking at commodities this afternoon, gold is trading at $3,324 and platinum at $1,376 per ounce, while Brent crude oil has gone slightly higher to $68.15 a barrel. And those are your indicators this afternoon. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459 for Channel Africa Business. I am Buntle Hetbush.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Interracial relationships. And now you are based in the States and you are married to a beautiful white woman, white lady.
I learned that, for us in our culture, we literally can speak our mind. I remember when we had started dating and whatnot, and, she picked up like a little bit of weight. And me, I was like, oh, wow, you must be happy in this relationship because look at you. You look great. You're even picking up some weight. And she got really, really offended. And it took I think it was about a couple of hours before I could realize that, because I could tell that she was off after that. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. Until later when I was talking to her, I'm like, you're really, really off today. And then she expressed that, yeah, because you're telling me that I'm picking on some weight. And I'm like, in my culture, when you are gaining some weight, it means you're happy.
Yes.
So that's what I was trying to imply.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege.
We now cross it to Musuburi Makura, who has our business and sport.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
And a very good afternoon from the sports desk. Let's start here. So reaction continues to pour in after news that French club Lyon have been demoted to League 2 because of the poor state of their finances. So Lyon officials, including the owner John Textor, met with the DNGC on Tuesday, but failed to convince the body that the club had sufficiently improved their financial situation to lift the punishment. So last October, his Eagle Football Group, which owns a 77% stake in Lyon, announced debts of $601 million. Now, French football expert Julien Loriens explains further.
Today was the day where John Textor and his director of football were going into the office to show their plan and explain why Lyon should not be relegated. Because if you remember, back in November, they'd been provisionally relegated by the DNCG because at the time they were in debts of 175 million euros, so around 200 million pounds, let's say. Back then in November, the DNCG said, listen, if it stays like this, you're going to go down regardless of where you finish in the league. So you better sort out your accounts between now in November and June when you come back to see us. And John Textor was like, yes, don't worry, no problem. We will sell players in January. We will do the same before at the end of June and all of that. We've got all this plan in place. So they went quite optimistic today. This news that came, an hour ago tonight was a massive, massive, massive earthquake in French football.
So Lyon's relegation could also prove significant to Crystal Palace's hopes of playing in the Europa League next season. There remains an air of caution as well at Crystal Palace despite the significant news of Lyon enforced relegation. UEFA rules state that two clubs under significant control of the same person or entity cannot compete in the same competition, and that the team with the highest league finish, Lyon, will then take the spot in their respective European competition. The Premier League side have now insisted to UEFA that Textor has no control at all at Selhurst Park, despite the American business company Eagle Football Holdings also holding a 43.9% stake. At the same time, Loriens also criticised Textor's business model and just how he ran the club.
It's terrible. I mean, since John Textor took over and bought the club from Jean-Michel Aulas, who is this historic figure who took the club in mid-table in the second division in mid-80s to, as you said, 7 league titles in a row, semi-finals of the Champions League all the time, to this now, to being relegated to the second tier in France. John Textor's made this club a mess. There's no other way of putting it. He's been one of the worst owners and he's been one of the worst ownership time that we've seen in French football in recent history, spending money all everywhere, sacking managers, hiring the wrong manager, sacking again another manager.
Right, so this is a story, of course, that we're watching very closely over the next coming weeks. On to the story now. Arsenal are interested in Brentford midfielder Christian Nogard amid uncertainty over Thomas Partey's future. Now, sources have indicated that the Gunners are exploring a deal worth an initial $13 million with a possible $7 million in performance-related add-ons for the 31-year-old Danish international. Nogard, who has not been on a long-term target for the Gunners, is now on the club's radar as they seek experience in midfield, with the 32-year-old Partey having so far failed to agree terms over extending his contract. Ghana midfielder Partey's contract expires next week, and if a deal cannot be reached, he will leave the club. Sonogard, whose contract with Brentford expires in 2027, moved to the club in 2019 and became also a key player for them under former manager Thomas Frank, who now has taken over Tottenham Hotspur. Arsenal are also said to complete the signing of Chelsea goalkeeper Kepa Arrizabalaga this week by about paying $7 million in a release clause, and are also close to finalizing a $61 million signing of Real Sociedad midfielder Martin Zumendi. And finally, Senegal goalkeeper Edward Mendy says criticism that he and other players chase money by moving to Saudi Arabia is wide off the mark. The 33-year-old Chelsea former player left for Al Hilal in a $20 million deal back in 2023, and in May the Africa Cup of Nations winner helped his Saudi club win the Asian Champions League, also making him one of the few players to win both that competition, which is also the European equivalent. But like many others, Mendy has been criticised for playing for money rather than the prestige in a lucrative Saudi Pro League tournament. The Blues have now since won the Conference League, the Europa League third-tier competition under the ownership of Todd Bodley, as well as the Clear Lake capital. It's 16:38 p.m. Central African time, and that's a wrap of your Sports Users Hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, simply send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or give us a call. The newsroom line is a +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibu D. Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Thanks to Buntle Headbush from the Business and Economic Desk, as well as Musiburi Makura from our Sport Desk. Now on to this. In a continent where infrastructure resilience and risk management are paramount, Dr. Janet Cotton, one of Africa's most distinguished metallurgists and founder of the globally respected, accredited 180 Materials Engineering Solutions, is quietly leading a revolution in failure prevention. Based in Cape Town, South Africa, this woman-led African laboratory is actively preventing catastrophic engineering failures, safeguarding multi-billion-dollar assets, and significantly reducing investor risk across vital industrial sectors. Dr. Cotton now joins us on the line to talk to us more about this. Dr. Cotton, it seems as if you have a lot of work cut out for you. Good afternoon, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Yes, indeed. You know, from what I've read, it sounded like it's quite a lot of work and, requires a lot of energy, time, as well as devotion. You established this laboratory in 2002 and following your PhD in materials engineering, and now it's spearheading Africa's most accredited testing facility. What inspired you to take this path?
Well, while I was doing my PhD, many people used to come to the university from industry to ask questions about problems they were having with manufactured products. and so on. So I recently just looked up some statistics, which I think might be interesting for you, just to contextualize materials engineering and its importance in emerging economies. In America today, in the United States, there are 420 companies that employ between 100 and 1,000 employees offering materials engineering, consulting, engineering services. And there are further 230 companies with employees of between 5 and 100 offering the same services that I offer. So that's the scale of the accessibility of materials engineering services in the United States of America. And if we had to take a sort of midline between the number of employees, there's probably around 200,000 metallurgists or materials engineers that are providing services to a population of 350 million people in a highly industrialized economy. Whereas in Africa, we have a population of about 1.5 billion, which is fragmented over a very big continent. But we certainly don't have anywhere near the number of metallurgical and materials engineers offering our services for these large infrastructure projects that countries like Uganda, Ghana, Namibia, and even our own country are relying on infrastructure developments to industrialize, and yet these services are just not being considered, and in fact have been underrated in the last 2 or 3 decades in South Africa. And if we want to follow the giants of industry, we have to, follow their example and see, what is available to them, and that's just simply not the case in Africa. So that's my cause. I'm leading the way and saying, I want to be part of the solution. Let's not sit around and complain. Let's be part of the solution and make these services accessible to these large projects on continents, rather than bringing in people from outside of Africa to solve these problems. Let's rather develop Africa to solve the problems themselves.
Of course, definitely. We have to come up with solutions, African solutions for African problems. Now, in your findings, as well as your observation, seeing that you have been in this for a while now, in Africa, what could be the constraints? Yes, you've spoken of not having enough metallurgists offering services and providing these services, whether it be overseas or any other investors. What could be the problem? Is it in governments? Is it in private partnerships? Where is it lying?
Well, I think it's lying in a few different areas, and that's the reason for my Root Cause Analysis Africa conference, which is to try and bring people to the failures and the disasters so that we can learn from them and see what we can implement at all the different levels, at the finance level, at the underwriting level, at the insurance level, at the legal level, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that is what we're planning to do with the conference, is to create that sort of awareness of the importance of the services. But the reason I think that there's been a decline in South Africa is metallurgical and materials engineering has been undervalued. And it's a sort of thing that when you need it, you really need it. And then people are prepared to bring in experts from London or experts from America and pay exorbitant amounts of money, relatively speaking. So it's not as though people don't acknowledge that the services are required. It's just that they acknowledge it too late. They acknowledge it when there's a failure. They acknowledge it when there's a huge loss and there's a big fight. And what we're trying to do is say, let's bring this expertise in at the high level, at the FID level on a major capital project, or at the underwriting level when the project starts, because that is how it's done overseas.
180's work directly correlates with financial performance and operational continuity, offering tangible benefits for capital preservation. Tell us more about this. It seems as if this is another solution.
Yes, well, at the recent conference that I launched this year, the inaugural Root Cause Africa conference, we heard about some elbow fittings on a cooling system for a solar plant that cost 90 Rand, and there were 1,000 of them. And they failed when the plant was commissioned, which meant that the project was delivered late, which meant that the underwriters that were ensuring the late delivery of the project had to pay out on a policy of over 100 million Rand, over 90,000 Rands worth of parts. And we are trying to join those dots because the people installing those elbow joints would not have seen the value of testing them before installing them because they were only 90 Rand joints. But seen in the greater picture of the project being delivered late and an insurance company ensuring late delivery of the project and a policy being activated, and then having to deliver 100 million Rand or whatever the fees were, they were, that sort of order of magnitude. It doesn't make any sense. And this could have been caught very easily with metallurgical and professional metallurgical materials engineering expertise at that point in the project. That those elbow joints could have been caught and found to be defective before they were installed.
Before I let you go, Dr. Cotton, I'm looking at the STEM field in Africa. How would you then describe its future, in the industry and the continent as a whole? And I'm sure, given from the work that you are leading, it's not the end of it. There is a future here.
Absolutely. There's such a huge future, and there needs to be. And I go back to the statistics that I gave you in the United States. And we need to move in that direction. And so we need to develop universities to grow materials engineering schools. We need to educate industry of the commercial value of metallurgical materials engineering and the difference it can make, and the risk mitigation value of these expertise. And if we do that, we will create jobs for metallurgical and materials engineers. And if there are jobs for those sort of engineers, they will study that sort of engineering. And if it's a lucrative engineering profession, the students will go and study. At my conference, Professor Cyril O'Connor, who used to be the Dean of Engineering, said the students decide what to study by looking in the newspaper and seeing which careers pay the most money. And sadly, they choose to become chartered accountants because that's where the most money lies, and they don't necessarily choose engineering. But at the moment, there are no adverts for jobs for metallurgical materials engineers in South Africa or Africa. And that's because of the lack of understanding of the commercial application of materials engineering. And that's what I'm trying to achieve through my Root Cause Analysis Africa conference, which is going to be held yearly from now onwards in Cape Town, South Africa.
Any support from the spheres of government?
Well, I'm gratefully acknowledge the support of the Departments of Trade and Industry with regard to setting up my laboratory through their National Industrial Participation Program. But at the moment, there's not really many places to go. There's the IDC, who has a venture capital arm, and then there's the TIA. But we don't sort of fit into. We just don't seem to be sexy enough for them at the moment.
But sexy
but
enough.
Perhaps that will change.
But sexy enough indeed to create a future for this. Many young people are definitely looking into going into, these interesting engineering type of fields, and I'm sure the future looks bright. Doctor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. That's Dr. Janet Cotton, a metallurgist and founder of 180 Materials Engineering Solutions.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Rising food prices, coupled with higher personal income taxes, are likely to dampen consumer spending, with a moderation in spending expected in 2026 in South Africa. That's according to the latest FNB BER Consumer Confidence Index, which showed consumers were less pessimistic about future prospects. Much of this positivity hinges on the direction of the global economy, and this is as the Thabiso Lehoko reports.
Food prices are rising in South Africa, growing by 4% year-on-year in May, according to the recent headline Consumer Price Index. This is much higher than international food prices, which have gone up by 0.2% on a monthly basis. Part of this was a weaker currency, which had weakened by 3.3% in the early part of this year, following disagreements over government's budget and external factors. The lower oil price is expected to shield consumers from an increase in the fuel tax that came into effect in June. The First National Bank and Bureau of Economic Research Consumer Confidence Index showed an improved sentiment in the second quarter of this year compared to the first 3 months of this year. The FNB-BER Consumer Confidence Index is a survey that provides regular assessments of consumer attitudes and expectations, which are in turn used to measure economic trends and prospects. FNB's chief economist Mamelo Ngwenya says after plunging from -6 to -20 index points during the first quarter, consumer confidence rebounded to -10 in the second quarter, but the index reading remains below the more positive outcomes recorded in the second half of 2024.
Given the deterioration in both the global and domestic economic outlook in recent months, coupled with the fact that Budget 3.0 made no inflationary adjustments to income tax brackets and medical aid tax credits, it is not surprising that high-income confidence settled at a lower level compared to their sentiment during the second half of 2024.
All three sub-indices of the index recovered some lost ground during the second quarter. Sentiment was notably positive among higher-income households, that is, those earning more than $1,128 per month, but not so much among those on the opposite end of the stick. Ngwenya says a projected interest rate cut next month will partially protect middle to high-income consumers from the impact of the increase in prices.
Middle-income confidence is currently significantly higher compared to high and low-income confidence. Additional two-pot pension fund withdrawals at the start of the new financial year in March and another 25 basis point cut in the prime interest rate at the end of May are supporting highly indebted middle-income households in particular. The confidence level of low-income households only edged up by 2 index points to -15 after falling by 10 points to -17 during the first quarter.
Lower fuel prices and above inflation adjustments to social grants are bolstering the spending power of low-income households, but not having access to formal sector credit or pension funds means this group has not benefited from lower interest rates or the two-pot withdrawals. While the outlook for household finances turned positive, much of it hinges on an avoidance of a recession in the global economy on the back of reciprocal tariff increases by the United States. The chairperson of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, told Congress earlier this week that a spike in inflation was expected in the third quarter of this year in that country, which could in turn affect the global economy. For Channel Africa News, I'm Thabiso Lehoko in Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Now in the heart of the North Rhine-Westphalia, where tradition meets a cosmopolitan flair, the vibrant city of a colony stands as Germany's fourth largest metropolis and its most international after Berlin. Known for its spirited carnival, iconic Kolsch beer, and a thriving media industry, Cologne isn't just about old cathedrals and riverfront strolls. It's a city that embraces diversity, creativity and celebration at every corner. As Channel Africa is in Germany, we caught up with Marija Mijuskovic, a Serbian media student and resident for the past 3 years, who gave our reporter Michael Mbewet a vivid look into life in this liberal, multi-cultural hub, from its a festive street culture to its economic lifeblood in television and beyond. Here's a story from the streets.
It is the biggest city in North Rhine-Westphalia. It is not the capital. I believe that is Düsseldorf. That's like the admin center. But this one is the biggest at around 1.4, I want to say, million people. It is supposed to be one of the most international cities in Germany after Berlin. It is a very open city, and it's the most famous for Carnival. It takes place in the period between the 11th November. It starts exactly at 11:11 and technically continues until the week before Easter. So like right before Lent it ends, and then we have a week in February where we celebrate and people dress up and there's a lot of alcohol on the street. It's like a really big street party. Yes. And
so tell us about the culture. Take us through, the dressing in terms of the tradition, teachings of the culture in Germany, but also the cuisine, and then, like you said, in the carnival, what kind of music, besides the alcohol festival.
Yes.
What kind of music do Germans like locally? Yes.
It's an interesting question because for Cologne, you cannot really say that it is a super German capital. I think what you're thinking when you say, this is a German visual, it's mostly Bavaria. If you're thinking of like traditional milkmaid outfits and beer culture and beer fest, that would be in the south. Here, it is so international that you cannot really say, people have this like one style of dressing, for example, or one. It's very international. We have a lot of different cuisines. Over the bridge, you've mostly stuck to this part of town, like the old town, but if you cross the bridge, there is an area called Mulheim, and it is a famous Turkish quarter, so you will have a lot of Turkish restaurants there and Turkish music and so on and so forth. As for the food, it's like traditional German stuff you would find at pubs. They have a very strong beer culture here as well. They have their local beer called Kölsch. It's actually determined by geography, so there's an exact point at which Kölsch stops being Kölsch and then becomes some other type of beer. That's a very long, probably the one and only, the oldest tradition in Cologne that we've had for the past 200 years, I want to say, maybe even more. I hope that answers your question.
Let's move to now the economy. In terms of source of income, I've seen a lot of people walking around mixed with the tourists. Are people relying on in the public sector in terms of jobs, or perhaps maybe they also rely on businesses?
Yes, well, Cologne is famous for television, actually. It is a media center of Germany. It's even stronger than Berlin in that respect, because Berlin is more for film or whatever you want, Berlinale and other branches, but Cologne specifically is for television and media. Dusseldorf, you'll notice it's very near. It's like the three main cities in North Rhine-Westphalia are Cologne, Dusseldorf and Bonn, and Dusseldorf is a famous admin center. So if you're into economy, for example, anything to do with bureaucracy, you would go there. So it's like.
That was Marija Mijuskovic, a local media student, speaking to Michael Mbewe in Cologne, Germany. Joanne is in studio. Joanne?
Oui, Thabiso, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Ça va bien.
Très bien. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa sur Vue d'Afrique. Tout à l'heure, il sera question de la Côte d'Ivoire, du Cameroun, mais aussi de la Journée mondiale contre la drogue. Merci de rester connectés. C'est dans quelques minutes. Merci, Thabiso.
Merci, Joanne. And this is where African business brings it to an end today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Thabiso Lehoko, in for Thami Ngubeni. Tomorrow is Friday. Let's do it again. Goodbye.